Inverted Man here. By now you've seen the Infinite Hope video that I posted for April's Fools, as I am known to do from year to year. Well, not every year. I do other things sometimes. It depends. At any rate, you might be wondering, what the bleep happened? Who is that? What's going on? Well, this is me back in the day when I was a Christian, Infinite Hope. And that channel doesn't exist, but I still have some of the videos for it. And I've done Me versus Me a few times. I have a playlist. It's going to be in the description box, so if you're interested in me analyzing myself, you can check that out. This particular video is full of logical fallacies. So, here I go. Going to talk to myself again. Normally, I would talk about and try to present the objective arguments for God. Today, I want to focus on the subjective experience of God that we have access to immediately. Studies that are done on the subjective experience of religious experience or the spiritual realm only tell us that our brain considers this a reality. Dr. Andrew Newberg is a neuroscientist who became somewhat known because he does investigations into what happens to people's brains during so-called spiritual experiences. And he's been in some apologetic videos and films because of his research. But as far as I know, he's the only one doing this kind of research, which is kind of bad because it'd be great to have multiple data points. But even still, it's interesting that pieces of your brain light up when you believe about God, or when you pray, or when you think about these things, or when you're having these spiritual experiences. But it doesn't tell you whether or not it's real in the real world, just that it's really happening in your brain, which is, well, what we would expect. Of course it's happening in your brain, but is it happening anywhere else? Now, Newberg has said many times that with neuroscience you can't answer that question. Even if you look at a painting on the wall, he can show you what parts of your brain light up, but he can't use neuroscience to say that that painting is really on the wall, just that your brain thinks that the painting is on the wall. So, let's not conflate one with the other, past self. You're going to, aren't you? The part of our brain that lights up is the same part of our brain that lights up when we look at a picture on the wall. To our brain, this reality of the spiritual realm or the realm of God is no different than the picture on the wall. What's important to note about these studies is that they're not showing us that the part of our brain that creates dreams or hallucinations is lighting up when we're experiencing these religious experiences. Well, yes and no. The problem is with clips from Andrew Newberg that are often played, cherry-picked, and edited and out of context because they're featured in these apologetic movies and videos and whatnot, is that you don't get the full picture. And even listening to him talking about these things, you still don't get the full picture. Now, there's a very good YouTube channel that explains brain science and does so within a short amount of time. So I'll link that in the description if you're interested in checking that out. The thing is that multiple parts of our brain can do multiple different things. And thinking that only one area of the brain is responsible for anything is kind of true, but it's kind of not true at the same time. And I'm no neuroscientist, so I'm really out of my field here. But see, back then, when I believed in God, well, anything and everything seemed like something I could latch onto as more additional proof for God. I was pretty desperate to prove God. Now, at the time, I didn't feel desperate, and it didn't seem like I was desperate, but, I think looking back, I was really wanting people to believe in God. Because there's this feeling that I had when I would think about God. Not all the time, but certain times. Or when I would experience God. But not all the time. Just sometimes. And I didn't want anyone to miss out on that feeling. That's a very human thing. Is we want people to feel what we feel. We want people to experience what we experience so that they can enjoy what we enjoy and so that we can enjoy what they enjoy, and back and forth. It's reciprocal. So because of that, I didn't really think about deeply or look into deeply what it was that Newberg was really talking about. I just kind of relied on what the apologetic videos were using of him to forward my ideas in this video. Or some would refer to them as mystical experiences. This shows us that the claim that many have made that it's an illusion is a false claim. If it was an illusion, it should be occurring in the part of our brain that's responsible for dreams or imagination. But that's not the part of our brain that's lighting up. The problem here, again, is multiple parts of the brain can do multiple different tasks. And there's been more than one reported case where pieces of somebody's brain have been damaged or destroyed and other parts have taken over. People who have their hemispheres cut in half often develop two distinct personalities. Well, that means that each hemisphere is capable of generating a self, what we would think of as me, or, well, you would think of as you. You might ask the question, well, who is you in that case? If your brain is separated into two hemispheres, and each of them develops a personality, which one is the actual you? And from the outside looking in, I don't think there's a way to answer that. Maybe there's not even a way to answer that from the inside looking out either. Because the you that did exist might not exist anymore. But two new yous would then exist, I guess. But you'd only be aware of one of it, although the other half would be aware of that one. So that's kind of weird. And it's hard to conceive of how our brain is able to make the self be a thing at all. There's this one guy that was having really terrible headaches and gone into the ER or whatever, and they found that his brain was being pushed against his skull by all the fluid in his head. It hadn't stopped producing fluid, and so he had very thin brain, like there was massive brain missing, but his brain adapted because it happened slowly over time. So he doesn't have as much of a brain as anyone else, but it doesn't matter. The brain was able to handle it just fine. That's pretty cool that the brain can do that. Also means we don't really need that much of the brain, I guess, but well, I'd rather have all of it than miss some of it. Nonetheless, things like this really highlight the problem of this thinking where, well, it's not lighting up the imagination spot, so therefore it's got to be real. Well, no, maybe I've programmed my brain to think that it's real, and so my brain is not lighting up the imagination spot, because if it did, it would detect that as being imagination and not real. So I'm telling my brain to direct these thoughts, feelings, emotions, etc., to parts of my brain that are not the imagination spot. And my brain does it. Of course, not everybody can do that. So not everybody can have these mystical spiritual experiences. It's just another facet that we would expect from biological evolution. There's different types of brains out there. The plasticity of a brain, the ability that has to change, is amazing. And to think that, well, it's not showing up under imagination, therefore it's got to be real, is just missing the point. It's conflating issues that, well, my past self simply didn't understand. I don't pretend to understand neuroscience today, so it is something that we should take with a great deal of skepticism. I'm no expert on this subject, but now I'm willing to admit that. Back then, well, I didn't really seem to say anything about that. Additionally, further inquiry has revealed that people will report, and yes, that's a subjective thing, but people will report that these experiences are more real than reality itself. That is to say, looking at the picture on the wall, my brain considers real. Praying and experiencing a spiritual truth is more real to me than that external reality is. Well, this might be true, at least as far as a few people, or maybe even the majority of them. Wish I had the data. I don't. Don't know how many people said that this was the case. And if it's somewhere on Dr. Andrew Newberg's site, bleeped if I know where. But the study I'm referencing is not referenced in my past video, and I have to look at the argument as presented. Without that data, that's a hard claim to make. And even if it happened to be the case that everybody reported that this was more real than reality, whatever that means, so what? Maybe the brain's just saying that that's the case because, again, we're telling the brain to make it seem that way somehow. It's in some sort of feedback loop or something. Without ample data, just don't know. And we still have the problem of the appeal to the minority of one. Only Dr. Andrew Newberg is doing this research, as far as I know. So we only have one data set to consider. We need duplication for this to really mean something. We don't have that. Another part left out here is studies that I wasn't aware of at the time with the so-called God helmet, which is this helmet that's been developed that does, like, I think it does magnetic waves into your head or whatever, and it makes the person experience, like, weird stuff, like spiritual things or God things or whatever, because it messes with how the brain works, basically. Well, if we can artificially make you think that you experience God, on the one hand, and you can't tell the difference in your own head between that and your brain telling you that you just experienced God, then how do you know when it's artificial and not artificial? And the fact that it is your brain where this experiencing is coming from with no external stimuli that we can measure at any rate, all that can really tell us is that the brain is experiencing this phenomenon because it wants to. If there's no external stimuli, then it's coming from within. Of course, back then, I would have said something like, it's the spiritual realm, and you can't measure the spiritual realm. Why not? It would have to interact with the physical realm at some point, so there'd be something to measure. Otherwise, what is our brain detecting that's making it switch on to detect God? And why is this something that happens across religions and isn't unique to only one religion? These are problems that I simply did not address.
Since this subjective experience is something that you personally can encounter yourself, I would like to promote the idea that one explore this realm. However, I will do so on a Christian bias. That is to say, I will not promote that you should investigate it in what I would consider the wrong way. Meditation upon oneself is a New Age idea. I reject this idea full heartedly. If one is going to meditate to try to encounter the spiritual realm, I would emphasize a meditation upon God, at least in general, and I would really want to emphasize meditation upon Christ Jesus specifically.
Well, at least I was honest in my bias. Oh my word. No, you can meditate on yourself or anything else you want, and I don't know where I got the idea of meditating on yourself being New Age. Who the bleep knows at this point? But, I mean, at least I was, honest about my bias. You can meditate about anything or everything or nothing at all, and it doesn't matter. All meditation does, really, actually, factually, data correlated, is calm you down. That's it. Breathing in and out, focusing on that, calms you down, relieves some stress, clears your mind. That's it. That's all it does. So if you want to meditate on things, mantras or music or whatever, it may or may not help that process to actually work. Depends on the sort of brain you have and whether or not you're going to achieve any sort of experience also depends on the sort of brain you have. You might try meditation for hours and yeah, it's relaxing, but nothing happens. Or you might try it for a few minutes and bam, all of a sudden you feel something that is really cool, or you see something that you know isn't really there. And that's really what it should always be, is to know that this experience that you're having is happening in your brain, and that's it. There's no reason to think that it's happening anywhere else, especially if you can't record it, like with a video camera or something. You could document yourself meditating and then say, oh, I think I saw lights while I was meditating. Go check the, playback. There's no lights, so that was just in my brain. Case closed. Be skeptical. But I don't have any problem with you meditating on anything or nothing or whatever if you want to. I think that if you go into it with a specific God or deity or whatever in mind, that will bias your brain towards that idea. So it might be more interesting if you were curious about what it is to feel the spiritual experience, to just meditate on your own breathing or maybe some quiet music or something like that. And it might not even do anything because your brain might not work that way.
Mainly because my emotions dictate to me that I don't want somebody to miss out on the experience of God. I want everyone to experience that at least once, even if at the end of the day they don't know what to make of it or they walk away from it and dismiss it. I would still want them to have experienced that so that when they hear arguments about these sort of things, they'll be like, oh yeah, I remember I did experience that. Additionally, I do want to say that I think that such an experience will make somebody more curious about it and more open to the possibility of God's existence.
Well, it's certainly an emotional argument, but that's really all it is an argument to and from emotion. The desire that I had back then, that I was talking about earlier, I didn't want anyone to miss out on this experience. The fact of the matter is, many people's brains are simply unable to experience this phenomenon, which I didn't know at the time. And that would mean something significant if there actually was a spiritual realm in the first place, or a god, or whatever. Because what it would mean is that the deity, the god, made it so that only some people can experience its, divine nature, or the spiritual world. Why? Why would it do that? Just because, arbitrarily? I mean, I guess you could come up with apologetic reasons, and people do. But it just seems rather off. More so that we have a natural explanation for why brains are different. I think that the feeling of God is one that we collectively as a species developed the ability to have, and that doing that gave some of us some sort of advantage, and so it stuck with us. And other people didn't have that ability, and yet they still survived okay. So it's hard to say which one is more than the other at this point in time. That would be an interesting study, but it would have to encompass the entirety of humanity to really know for sure what the percentages was. Well, maybe it wouldn't have to be that big. But at any rate, whatever experience you do or don't have, that doesn't mean that the thing is real. What it means is that your brain is capable of producing these sensations, these pictures, these imaginations, these dreams, these wonders, because the brain is pretty darn cool and can do all sorts of weird and wacky things. But let us not get carried away with our desire for it to be anything more than our own mind. God is you. That is the nearest certainty. If God is more than just you, well, that would require not a subjective argument, but an objective one. I didn't provide that here, although I hinted at it. Why didn't I provide it? What's wrong with you, past self? Oh, well. Until next time. Wait, that's my old closing thing. In less than until we have logical lobsters something.